Hi lovebugs! I know it's been a while since the last time I posted. Sorry about that. I got really busy. I do have one video that I made and like never edited, so maybe I'll put that up later. But today I wanted to talk to you guys about Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. I got this book as an ARC copy, so it hasn't come out quite yet. Hopefully I'll post it before this comes out and I'll be like super bougie, one of those cool booktubers who gets to talk about books before they come out, except I procrastinate and I like just finished this. So I wanted to talk about it. It was one of my most anticipated reads of this year. Not that I'm like super up to date with what's coming out this year. We should probably preface with that. I don't know a whole lot that's coming out this year, but I was really excited for this one. I'm gonna split this video up into parts like I usually do when I review books. It's just easier to keep track of, and I'll put the little chapters down there so you can see what I'm talking about. So our main character Benji is a trans boy who is escaping this murderous extremist Christian cult, and he gets taken in by an LGBT youth center called ALK, and he meets a lot of friends. We get a diverse little B cast, and he is holding a secret that he has been infected by the cult's latest bioweapon and is transforming into a biblical, like, eldritch horror. It was a really fun premise. I actually didn't know the premise before I went into it. I just knew it was like biblical horror, which I thought was really fun. But I do have some criticisms, I do have some critiques that I'm going to be talking about, both good and bad. So yeah, let's just get into it. I'm going to start off by talking about the world building in general, because I think it's a good place to start. So we are told that the world has kind of gone to shit within a couple years, and that I guess it's assumed that like a large part of why that happens is because of the cult. And I kind of had an issue with this because it was really difficult for me at a lot of points during the story to understand the scale that we were operating on and like the scope of what's going on. So the plot takes place between a couple different places. There's the ALK, the youth center, there's the cult and their churches and all their districts and stuff. And it was difficult to understand just like how much distance was between those places and what the landscape looked like between those places, because it kind of just felt like they went from one place to another without really like explaining the journey, which is fine, but also like I didn't really know I didn't know how long it was taking us. I didn't know how rigorous of a journey it was. So that was a little bit confusing to me at times. I think this book really should have had a map at the beginning. I think that just would have been amazing if like we were able to see this is where ALK is, this is the cult's home base, these are all their little churches. It would have just made it a lot more clear without actually changing any of the content of the story. I also struggle with the idea that the cult is responsible for everything that's gone wrong, just because like cults are typically pretty small, and like they are formidable, definitely. They have weapons, they have bioweapons and like mutated monster people. So like I get it, I definitely get it, but how many people are in this cult? There's like a little bit more information about how this all got started, why they're using, or well, okay, I guess I don't really need to know why, because they're radical extremists, like religious people, and they talk about like end times and yeah, so like I guess that's kind of understandable. Not great, but understandable. It's about, oh, okay, this is my point. Within ALK, and we're gonna be transferring into characters in a second, it's gonna overlap a little bit. Within ALK, we have like maybe 6 or 7 main side characters, but there are a lot of names that get thrown around or brought up and then not brought up again, and it's really difficult to understand how many people are there and like how large of a facility this is, because at first when we got introduced to like our B cast, I thought that was it. Like I thought there were 6 or 7 people in this facility, and that made sense to me because it's dystopian and like presumably everybody's fucking dead. But that did not appear to be the case. It seemed like there were more like 30 or so people here, and that's very different. So Yeah, it was just a little difficult to understand exactly what was going on and exactly where it was going on, who was involved. So I think those are some things that would have needed clarification. However, something I really do like about the world building, we're going to transfer later actually into characters because I thought of another point. Something I really do like about the world building is that everything that happens is related to the Bible. Like all the horrific monsters that are mutated are all based around biblical creatures or are all named after biblical creatures. All the like the day that the cult kind of took over is called Judgment Day, and the terrible monster that Benji is turning into is called a seraph, which is a type of angel. So it was very much like taking the worst parts of religion and making them something physically horrible. And that was really interesting. It was really cool to see how the author was able to really just like embody and make these things, or personify is what I mean to say, just like really take these concepts and give them flesh and blood. And that was really cool, and I really liked how he did that. The characters, like I said, there were a lot more of them than I initially thought because I just wasn't really sure how many people were in ALK. And I think that actually works against the book because a lot of the time the characters will be introduced and then they'll leave, and that's fine. But it also means that a lot of characters don't get development. There's a couple of named characters who come up a lot and who interact with Benji and Nick a lot, but they never really get development or like really characterization because they're so infrequent and because there's so many of them that they really just get like a line of dialogue in every so often, and it's difficult to piece together who these characters are if we have so little of them. And I think that this book could have definitely been longer, and that could have been something that was elaborated on. But I also think that mainly what I think is that the cast should have been reduced. There should have only been like 4 or 5 characters who were given names in ALK and who are like reoccurring, because then it would have been easier for those characters to get distinct personalities. And we start to get distinct personalities with a couple of them. Like we know that I think his name is Calvin, is like a rich asshole. Okay. And we know that we know character traits about each of these people, but that's really it. We get like 1 or 2 descriptors of them, and then like that's their character. So Calvin is rich and he's a dick, and that's all we know about him. We don't know anything else. And I just think that really doesn't help the story. So like a lot of the time it's like, why are these characters here if they're not really contributing anything? I just don't really need them if they're not gonna do anything. There was one, oh, his name was Cormac, not Calvin. Oh wait, no, maybe it was Calvin. There's a Cormac and a Calvin. I think I was right. I think it's Calvin. But like there are characters who get mentioned, like this character Micah gets mentioned. Who knows who he is? There's this one interaction that I thought was really good, and it was between Benji and another character. I can't remember if, I don't think it's Sadif. I think it's a different character. It might be Faith. I don't know. This person like comes up once and then doesn't come back, so that's another issue. But he has this interaction with another one of the characters, and they're talking about how they're wearing cross earrings, this other character is, and Benji has just escaped the extremist radicalized Christian cult, so he's like, hey, I have a question about your cross earrings, because obviously he doesn't have the best experience with Christianity. And so they're just like talking about religion and how they still believe in God, but it's just like a complicated thing. There's a lot of nuance to it, and other people in ALK are different religions. They mention one of the characters is Muslim, another one is Jewish, and it's such an interesting interaction, and I would have really liked to see that like continued through the whole novel. It's just this struggle with religion and accepting religion or rejecting it, because I think that there is a lot of nuance to that idea, especially for people who grew up with a really bad experience with religion. is separating the idea of religion from the church. And that is something that the book does. Like, a lot of the conflict, or the entirety of the conflict, is with the cult rather than the God himself. The way that it is treated is the cult becomes the villain, but then like God kind of takes a back seat and religion takes a back seat, which I think is like, it's definitely accurate to how cults are. I don't think that's controversial to say, where like the institution is more important than what it is supposedly worshiping. And that's definitely valid, but I do think it would have been really interesting to see that through line of just Benji coming to terms with, is he religious, does he believe in God, and being able to separate that from the cult, being able to recognize that the cult is not the only way that there is. I just think that there's a lot of nuance to that idea and a lot that can be talked about, especially if we're dealing with characters who are all different religions. And these are just like Abrahamic religions. It would also be interesting to see like different stuff come into play, but just the different ways that people interpret and worship the same idea of God is something that's really interesting, something that would have been really fun to see just like talked about in snippets throughout the story. Just to kind of, I don't know, just to kind of give it a little bit of depth. I would have really liked that. And it's fine that that doesn't happen because that doesn't really seem to be the point. But it's just something I would have liked. But I also understand, like I said, that the point of the book is not to really talk about religion at all. It's to talk about this radical extremist institution of religion and the worst aspects of religion made very kind of dialed up to 11, and that's fine. This is just something that I personally would have liked to see, and it doesn't really matter that it's not in the book, but I think it would have been cool. And I guess that does kind of lead into like a conversation of, is this book damning religion? And I don't think that it is. I think that this book is definitely damning the most violent aspects of religion, the people who make religion the worst it can be, but I don't think that it is making really any commentary on the existence of God or the morality of practicing religion. So like, if you were a very religious person, I think that it is still possible to enjoy this book without like feeling like your views are being attacked. I think this book is really effective in its horror elements, especially body horror. There's a lot of body horror and gore in this book, so like if that's gonna bother you, definitely be careful. But there's a lot of instances where this like emotional turmoil is also reflected in a physical turmoil, because as I said in the premise, the main character has been infected by a bioweapon and is like fighting the mutation that is happening to him the entire time. So we're seeing him wrestling with like the horror of what's going on around him while also becoming a creature of horror himself, like physically. And that's really interesting. I think it's a really great way of effectively capturing what is happening in the character's mental state, and also maybe going off on a limb here, but I think it's a really good way of showing just like ownership and loss of autonomy that has been happening to the main character within the church. So like that's kind of a spoiler, I'll actually not say that, but Benji has experienced a lot of transphobia and just like rejection of his trans identity throughout his lifetime, and he's been forced to dress as a girl and, you know, act as a girl, wear a girl's clothing, present himself as a girl, and that loss of autonomy and that loss of a person's like physical identity is also something that is reflected in his physical mutation throughout the story. And I think that's really interesting. It's really cool to see just like the way that his gender identity and like his personal visible identity, I don't know if that makes sense, is also kind of reflected in his loss of identity throughout the story, his loss of control over the way that he looks, his loss of like literally loss of pieces of his body as his body is mutating. And I just think that's really cool. It's a really effective way of kind of metaphorically showing that, but also literally showing that. This book is very diverse, so it's very fitting that it's coming out during Pride Month. most of the characters, especially obviously the characters in the LGBTQ plus youth center, are all somewhere in LGBTQ plus, and it is really refreshing to see those identities presented without any kind of pretext. You know, they're presented very neutrally, just like this is X and they are trans, this is Y and they are gay. You know, like it's presented very neutrally. It's not presented with a whole lot of baggage onto that identity, and I think that's really important and really fun. One last criticism that I have is that this book is fast. This book moves fucking fast. We are zooming through the plot like from page one, and I think it needs to slow down at points. There are times where the pacing is just like breakneck, and it's just not, it's like difficult to keep up with because there are major decisions that get made in like a matter of pages, like between, oh, I wrote it down, but I wrote it on my phone and now I'm recording on my phone. Fuck. Okay, so in the first, I'm gonna try to recap it to the best of my memory. In the first, okay, so book opens, we're running from the cult, dad's been shot, we get caught by the cult, we go back with the cult, we get attacked by one of the monsters. No, we don't. We get attacked by Alk. One of the monsters is attacking people. In response to that, we meet Nick. Nick is nice. Nick takes us in. One of the kids dies. We go back to Alk. Nick keeps our secret for us that we've been infected. Benji agrees to be with Alk and use his mutation for the good. And it's been like 45 pages. Like, we're fucking moving. We are zooming through this plot. And I think that's fine. Like, the beginning where he's running and he gets caught and then he's like, they get attacked by Alk, whatever. But like, he makes very major decisions in this book very quickly, within like 3 pages. And it's just like, let's think about this, Jesus. Because, oh, I just used the Lord's name in vain in my religious oh, I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, no, actually, now is a good time to talk about it. There are just pretty, like, major changes that happen in Benji that happen very quickly, and I think this all goes back to my idea that this book should be longer. It's pretty standard. It's 400 pages-ish. I think it could be like 600. I know that's ridiculous, and I know nobody wants to read a 600-page book, but like, I would read 600 pages of this. I would. I think it could be longer, and all these things could be slowed down and also elaborated on a little bit more. All the characters could get a little bit more characterization. We could get a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on around us, and like what the history of how we ended up here in this like dystopian terror place. I think this book could have been way longer. Now I lost my train of thought. I'm gonna round this out. Compliment sandwich. I didn't start with a compliment though. I'm gonna round this out with some praise. I really, really, really love the way that this book captures emotion. I think that the author does an incredible job of capturing just like raw feelings, just like anger and grief and desire to be fitting in and desire to be loved and all these things that are so human and so important and so fundamental to who this main character is. He captures it really beautifully and just like very viscerally, and that's also kind of where the body horror comes in, because like I said, it is also like a metaphorical part of who this character is that he's like literally cannot control, does not have the autonomy of his own body at times. And like just the way that he captures the way that the author captures just like his feelings and his anger and just all these like primal emotions is so good, and it is so beautiful. And I really love that. I really love that about this book. It was definitely something that I read very quickly. I'm actually in quarantine right now. So I just like sat down and read this in like 2 days, which is honestly, I was pacing myself because I knew I wasn't gonna have anything to do after I finished it. I read it really quickly. It was something that kept my attention the entire time, and I wanted to learn more, wanted to know where we were going, with the story, with the plot. And so it's definitely like this is a really good debut. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I did have issues with it, but a lot of them are just like kind of like craft. I don't know. I don't know. There are definitely some issues that I have discussed that can be improved in the next book, but there's nothing like about this book that I would say destroys it for me. Like there's no criticism that I have that ruined my experience with this book. It's fun. I liked it a lot. So yeah, I definitely recommend, if any of this sounded interesting to you, picking up a copy this Pride Month, celebrating Pride Month with this book. Yeah. Anyway, bye. The phone call that you heard at the end of that video was, in fact, my doctor calling to tell me that my COVID test was still positive and I had to remain in quarantine for another 2 days.